She mocked humanity's warrior myths, until she witnessed a real human fight. The sun was setting on the Zarthan Empire's capital, a city of marble towers and crystalline streets. Atop the highest tower, Princess Lyra gazed out at the sprawling metropolis below. Her thoughts were far from the beauty of the view. Her mind was focused on the upcoming grand competition. The galaxy's greatest warriors had been invited to compete in a series of challenges, each designed to test their strength, speed, and skill. The prize would be the title of the galaxy's greatest fighter, an honor that Lyra herself would personally bestow upon the victor. She had been planning this for months, selecting only the most dangerous and skilled competitors. Warriors from every corner of the galaxy would converge on her home planet, eager to prove themselves. But there was one fighter she cared little about, a human named Jack. Lyra had heard of humanity's warrior myths, stories of brave soldiers, mythical battles, and heroes that never gave up. To her, these were nothing more than fanciful tales, exaggerated over centuries. She had seen firsthand what the Zarthan Empire's warriors were capable of. Their strength, agility, and combat skills were unmatched in the galaxy. No mere human could stand a chance against the might of her people. As the day of the competition approached, Lyra found herself growing more amused by the idea of a human entering the tournament. She'd heard whispers of Jack's arrival, an ex-soldier turned wanderer. He wasn't even part of any major military force, just a lone human traveling through space. To her, he was no more than a curiosity, an amusing distraction that might provide a laugh or two. At the opening ceremony, the grand hall was filled with aliens of all shapes and sizes, warriors with thick muscles, sharp claws, and armor that could withstand blasts from the most powerful weapons. The air buzzed with excitement as the competitors lined up, ready to begin the trials. Lyra sat at her elevated throne, her eyes scanning the crowd. The human was easy to spot. He was shorter than most of the other competitors, with a simple, worn leather jacket and a demeanor that screamed of quiet confidence. Jack stood among the other contestants, clearly out of place. His eyes were calm, focused on the upcoming challenge. He didn't seem intimidated by the giant alien warriors standing next to him. In fact, he seemed almost indifferent, as though he'd been in competitions like this before. Lyra couldn't help but smirk. This would be an interesting spectacle. The competition began with a test of endurance. Each warrior was tasked with running through an obstacle course filled with traps, climbing walls, and moving platforms. The Zarthan warriors leaped effortlessly across gaps, scaling walls like creatures born for combat. Their strength was unparalleled, and they finished the course in record time, barely breaking a sweat. When it was Jack's turn, Lyra raised an eyebrow. Surely he would fail. The human would struggle with the course, and that would be the end of his participation. She almost couldn't wait to see it, but to her surprise, Jack didn't stumble. He didn't try to match the Zarthans in brute strength. Instead, he observed the course, calculating the best way to approach each challenge. He took his time, using his surroundings to his advantage. When faced with a massive wall, instead of trying to climb it directly, he found a smaller, weaker section of the structure and used his agility to scale it. When confronted with moving platforms, he didn't jump haphazardly. He timed his moves, waiting for the perfect moment to leap. It wasn't fast, but it was effective. Jack completed the course without a single mistake. The crowd was silent for a moment before erupting into applause, and Lyra's smirk faded. This human was proving to be more than just a simple curiosity. The next trial was a combat test, a one-on-one duel against a Zarthan warrior. The challenger would face off against an opponent chosen at random, and the fight would continue until one fighter was rendered unconscious or surrendered. Lyra's gaze fixed on the human again. There was no way he could win this time. The Zarthan warriors were brutal, trained from birth in combat. Jack, with no advanced weapons or armor, would be at a severe disadvantage. Jack's opponent was Karath, one of the fiercest warriors in the Empire. His size alone was intimidating, standing over 7 feet tall with biceps that could crush bones in a single grip. His armor was dark and spiked, designed to intimidate and injure. Karath stepped into the arena with a booming roar, his eyes glowing with excitement. Jack, on the other hand, stood calmly in the center, his posture relaxed, waiting for the signal to begin. Lyra watched with interest, curious to see how the human would approach the fight. The moment the bell rang, Karath charged, his massive fists raised to strike. The ground shook with his steps, and Jack barely managed to dodge the first punch, his body moving with an almost fluid grace. The Zarthan warrior's speed was incredible, and Jack was barely keeping up. He ducked, dodged, and weaved through Karath's attacks, his movements quick and precise. But Lyra couldn't help but notice something. Jack wasn't fighting like a typical warrior. While Karath relied on brute strength and overwhelming force, Jack was calculating, observing every move his opponent made. He was using Karath's own power against him. In a split second, Karath swung his massive fist toward Jack's head. The human ducked just in time, and the punch missed, sending the Zarthan warrior off balance. Jack seized the opportunity, grabbing Karath's arm and twisting it behind his back in a move that was surprisingly skilled for someone who had no formal training in Zarthan combat techniques. The audience gasped as the giant warrior stumbled, unable to break free. Jack held him there for a moment, a look of determination on his face. He wasn't trying to hurt Karath, he was trying to outsmart him, to win with skill rather than power. After a brief struggle, Karath collapsed to the ground, pinned by the human's maneuver. Lyra's mouth went dry. She had expected the fight to be over quickly, but Jack had done the impossible. He had beaten one of the Empire's greatest warriors with nothing but his wits and sheer willpower. The crowd erupted into applause again, this time with even more fervor. Jack stood over the fallen Karath, his chest heaving, but his expression remained calm, almost indifferent. Lyra was stunned. Her view of humanity, once so filled with skepticism, was beginning to crack. The warrior myths she had mocked were no longer so distant and laughable. Jack wasn't just a man from a lesser species. He was a fighter, a true warrior in every sense of the word. And yet Lyra couldn't help but feel conflicted. She had always believed in the superiority of her people, the Zarthans. They were strong, fierce, and unyielding. But Jack had proven that there was more to a warrior than strength. There was something else, something deep inside him. As the crowd's cheers died down, Lyra's gaze never left Jack. She wasn't laughing anymore. The human had earned her respect, whether she liked it or not. The arena was alive with excitement as the second day of the competition began. The morning sun cast a golden light over the vast Colosseum, its beams reflecting off the smooth, polished stone floors. The crowd filled the stands once again, their anticipation growing with every passing moment. The grand competition was in full swing, and even the most hardened warriors couldn't help but feel the electric thrill of the games. Princess Lyra sat in her high throne, her posture straight, her eyes scanning the arena. Her thoughts, however, were not on the competition as a whole, but on the unexpected human warrior, Jack. After the previous day's combat, her mind could not let go of what she had seen. She had never expected a human to last through the trials, let alone defeat one of her finest warriors. Jack's performance in the duel against Karath was nothing short of extraordinary. He had fought with intelligence, calmness, and precision, traits she had never associated with his kind. Lyra shifted in her seat, crossing her arms as she watched Jack in the distance, preparing for the next trial. He had earned the right to move on to the next round, though she could sense his lack of excitement. Jack wasn't here for glory or recognition. He was here because he had something to prove, perhaps to himself as much as anyone else. That, in itself, intrigued her. The next test was not a physical one, but a test of agility and endurance. A series of hurdles awaited the competitors. Large walls to scale, swinging pendulums to dodge, and pits of molten lava to leap over. It would push the limits of their agility, testing not just their strength, but their ability to think and react under pressure. Lyra was confident that Jack, with his smaller frame and apparent lack of strength, would struggle here. The Zarthan warriors were born with superior reflexes, and their bodies were designed for such challenges. They could jump, climb, and navigate difficult terrain with ease. Lyra watched them prepare with an air of superiority, their muscles flexing as they sized up the course. Jack, on the other hand, stood at the starting line with his eyes closed, his hands relaxed at his sides. He was not looking at the obstacles. He wasn't concerned with what lay ahead. He was focused on himself, on the feeling of the ground beneath his feet and the rhythm of his own breath. When the bell rang, signaling the start of the challenge, the Zarthan warriors surged forward with explosive power, leaping over walls and diving through obstacles as though the terrain were no challenge at all. The crowd cheered as they zipped through the course, each of them reaching the final checkpoint in record time. And then it was Jack's turn. Lyra leaned forward, watching closely. Jack didn't sprint like the others. Instead, he walked up to the first obstacle with calm deliberation. It was a massive wall, slick and smooth, taller than any human could hope to scale without aid. The Zarthan warriors had simply jumped, their strength giving them the momentum to reach the top with ease. Jack, however, did not attempt to leap. Instead, he scanned the wall carefully, his eyes moving over every inch of it. He studied the cracks, the small footholds, and the weaknesses in the structure. Without hesitation, he stepped forward and placed his hands against the wall, his feet finding small ledges as he climbed at a steady pace. It wasn't fast, but it was steady and efficient. He wasn't trying to overpower the obstacle. He was working with it. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Jack ascended, his movements deliberate, his focus sharp. While the Zarthans had rushed through the challenge, Jack took his time. He reached the top of the wall without breaking a sweat, and with a single leap he landed on the other side, his face calm and composed. The next obstacle was a series of pendulums, swinging blades that required perfect timing to avoid. Jack watched the blades swing back and forth for a moment, noting the patterns in their motion. His body tensed as he prepared to make his move. The first pendulum swung toward him, but he stepped to the side just in time, his movements fluid and precise. He timed each step, each dodge with the same measured pace, not rushing, not panicking. With each swing, Jack grew more confident, moving with the rhythm of the pendulums, his body flowing with the motion rather than fighting against it. He passed through the blades, untouched, as the crowd stared in awe. The Zarthans had charged through this section with speed and force, but Jack had used patience and understanding to navigate the danger. The final obstacle was the most difficult, a pit of molten lava stretching for 30 feet. The Zarthan warriors had no trouble here. They simply jumped across, their powerful legs propelling them effortlessly through the air. Jack, however, was smaller, and Lyra couldn't imagine how he would manage. The jump was too far for a human to make with just sheer strength. Jack paused at the edge of the pit, his gaze narrowing. He crouched low, assessing the distance, the angle, and the timing. Then, without hesitation, he began his run. Lyra watched, holding her breath. Would he be able to clear the gap? At the last moment, Jack launched himself into the air. For a split second, it seemed as though he wouldn't make it. But then, as if guided by instinct, his hands reached out and grabbed a hanging vine that dangled just above the lava. His body swung from the vine, his legs dangling inches above the molten rock. With a sharp tug, he swung back toward the other side, landing lightly on the far edge, his feet steady beneath him. The crowd exploded in applause, their cheers deafening. Jack had completed the course in his own way, not with brute force, but with precision, strategy, and ingenuity. Lyra's eyes widened. She had underestimated him once again. As Jack finished the challenge, he wiped the sweat from his brow, his face still expressionless. He had completed the trial, and yet there was no sense of triumph in his demeanor. For him, it was just another obstacle to overcome, just another step in the competition. But Lyra, watching from her throne, felt a strange sense of respect growing within her. Jack wasn't just a man from a weaker species. He was something more. A human warrior, yes, but a warrior in his own right, using his mind and skill to conquer challenges that others thought were impossible. She stood slowly from her throne, her heart pounding in her chest. She had heard the stories of humanity, of warriors who fought with courage and honor, but it was only now, seeing Jack in action, that she truly understood the power of those myths. They weren't just stories. They were real, and Jack, this simple human, was living proof of that. Lyra didn't know it yet, but the more she watched him, the more she would come to realize that the human way of fighting, so different from her own people's brute strength, was something that could not be ignored. And as the next trial approached, she found herself eagerly awaiting what Jack would do next. The arena had become a place of fascination, not just for the competitors, but for all who watched. The great Zarthan warriors, known for their strength and speed, had already made their marks, completing the various trials with impressive ease. However, the human competitor, Jack, was quickly becoming the talk of the Empire. No one had expected him to make it this far, least of all Princess Lyra. As the next challenge approached, Lyra couldn't help but feel a growing sense of uncertainty. She had underestimated Jack at every turn, and yet each time he had managed to surpass her expectations. The last two trials had been proof enough that he was not an ordinary human. There was something in his movements, his calmness under pressure, and his ability to think his way through obstacles that set him apart. But what was it? What made Jack so different? The challenge for the day was one of combat. The previous round had been a test of agility, but now it was time to see how the competitors fared in direct combat. The rules were simple. Each fighter would face off against an opponent, and the battle would continue until one fighter was incapacitated. Unlike the previous trials, this would be a test of pure skill and power, and Lyra was certain that the Zarthans would dominate. They were warriors born and bred for battle. The first match began with the clang of metal and the roar of the crowd. A towering Zarthan warrior, Garak, stood in the center of the arena, his body rippling with muscle. He was armed with a double-edged axe, the weapon glinting in the sunlight as he raised it above his head. His opponent, a much smaller being, a Zur, a species known for its agility, quickly darted to the side, trying to avoid the heavy swing of the axe. The Zur warrior moved with incredible speed, his body a blur as he launched himself at Garak's exposed side. It was a fast-paced, intense battle, and the crowd cheered as Garak and the Zur danced around each other, testing their limits. In the end, Garak's strength proved too much, and with a mighty blow, he sent the Zur warrior crashing to the ground. The crowd erupted in applause, but Lyra barely reacted. She had expected Garak to win, his size and strength were unmatched. But her mind was elsewhere, on the upcoming fight between Jack and another Zarthan, Narek, a seasoned warrior known for his brutal fighting style. Narek was not as tall as Garak, but he was quick and ruthless. He had won his previous battles with ease, and his reputation was feared throughout the galaxy. Lyra turned her attention to Jack, who stood quietly at the edge of the arena, waiting for his turn. He was calm, almost too calm, his eyes fixed on Narek, who was already preparing for battle. There was no fear in Jack's expression, no hint of nervousness. He had faced larger threats in his life, and this would be no different. As the signal for the fight to begin echoed through the arena, Narek wasted no time. He charged at Jack with a savage roar, his sword raised high. The crowd gasped, expecting Jack to be crushed under the brute force of Narek's attack. But to their surprise, Jack did not back down. Instead, he sidestepped at the last possible moment, allowing Narek's sword to slice through the air harmlessly. Narek, caught off guard by the sudden movement, stumbled forward, unable to regain his balance. Jack quickly took advantage of the opening. He didn't rely on strength to overpower Narek. Instead, he used his smaller size to slip past the warrior's defenses. With swift, precise strikes, Jack targeted the weak points in Narek's armor, the joints at the shoulders, the space beneath the ribcage, and the knee joints where the armor was less flexible. Narek's strikes were powerful, but Jack was faster, and with each move he wore Narek down, chipping away at his defenses. The crowd was silent, unsure of what they were witnessing. The Zarthans were known for their brutal, unrelenting fighting style. They were not used to seeing someone who fought with such precision and restraint. Narek, enraged by Jack's skill, swung his sword in wide arcs, hoping to catch the human in one of the sweeping blows. But Jack danced around him, never once staying in one place for too long. It was as though he could read Narek's every move before it happened, reacting before Narek had even completed his swing. The fight raged on, both fighters becoming more and more exhausted. Jack, despite his smaller frame, seemed to have an endless well of energy. He dodged, parried, and struck with speed that left Narek struggling to keep up. The Zarthan warrior's attacks grew sloppier, and Jack took advantage of the openings, delivering blows that would have taken down a lesser fighter. Finally, after what felt like hours, Narek faltered. His sword was raised for another strike, but his body was too tired to carry through with the motion. Jack saw the weakness and moved quickly, his foot catching Narek's knee and sending him stumbling. With a single, decisive move, Jack kicked the sword out of Narek's hand, and before the Zarthan could react, Jack had him pinned to the ground, his arm twisted behind his back. The crowd erupted into shocked applause. Jack had won again. Not with brute force, but with strategy, precision, and an uncanny understanding of his opponent's movements. Lyra's eyes widened as she looked down at the arena. She could hardly believe what she had just witnessed. The human had defeated Narek, one of her strongest warriors, in a battle of sheer skill. There was no luck here. Jack was a true fighter. As the announcer called Jack the winner, Lyra couldn't tear her eyes away from him. She had seen many warriors in her time, and while some were strong and others were fast, none had ever impressed her the way Jack had. He fought with a calm, collected precision that was unlike anything she had ever seen. She had to admit it. Jack was a warrior in his own right. But still, there was a part of her that resisted accepting him as an equal. Humans were supposed to be inferior, fragile, weak, and unworthy of the title of warrior. Yet here was Jack, standing tall and victorious, proving that her assumptions had been wrong. The Zarthans had always prided themselves on their strength, but Jack had shown her that there was more to being a warrior than raw power. As Jack left the arena, his body covered in sweat, he walked past Lyra's throne without even glancing in her direction. He wasn't here to impress anyone. He wasn't here to gain fame or accolades. He was here for a reason that no one, not even Lyra, could fully understand. Lyra watched him disappear into the tunnel leading out of the arena, and for the first time, she felt a strange respect for the human. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't driven by the need to dominate or prove his superiority. He fought because it was in his nature to do so, and when he won, it was simply a matter of course, not a declaration of his worth. She had thought that the Zarthan way of fighting was the only true way, but Jack's victory had shattered that belief. Maybe there was more to the galaxy than just strength. Maybe there was something deeper, something that even she, a princess of the mighty Zarthan Empire, had yet to fully comprehend. The challenge was far from over, but Lyra knew one thing for sure. The human had already changed everything. The competition had reached its final stages, and the anticipation in the air was almost unbearable. The galaxy's greatest warriors had been whittled down to only a few, with Jack still standing among them. Lyra's heart raced as she watched him prepare for what would likely be the most difficult challenge of all. The tension in the arena was palpable. Her once dismissive view of the human warrior had long since disappeared. Now she couldn't help but watch every move he made, intrigued by what he would do next. Jack had already taken down the most skilled Zarthan warriors, those who were trained from birth to fight. Yet despite his victories, he remained calm, almost detached. He had no need for the applause or the admiration that the other warriors craved. To Jack, this was not about fame. It was about proving something to himself, something that went far beyond the boundaries of the competition. The final trial was a battle against a group of 4 warriors, a test of teamwork, strategy, and endurance. The Zarthan Empire was known for its powerful forces, and this final challenge was designed to push even the strongest competitors to their limits. Lyra was curious to see how Jack would fare against multiple opponents. He had managed to outmaneuver every individual fighter so far, but now, facing 4 at once, he would be forced to fight with everything he had. The 4 Zarthans who stood before him were seasoned veterans, each of them skilled in different forms of combat. There was Varnak, a master of close-quarters combat with a massive mace; Zinara, an agile fighter known for her lightning-fast strikes; Igor, a brutish warrior who specialized in overwhelming force; and finally Kor, a strategic genius with a reputation for outsmarting his opponents. Together, they formed a formidable team, and Lyra knew they were more than capable of defeating any single combatant. The signal to begin the battle was given, and the 4 Zarthans immediately rushed toward Jack, their weapons raised and their eyes filled with determination. The crowd roared in excitement, eager to see how the human would respond to such overwhelming odds. Jack's movements were swift as he sidestepped the first attack from Varnak. The Zarthan warrior's mace came crashing down toward him with a force that would have pulverized most opponents. But Jack was already moving, his body reacting instinctively, his mind racing through possible ways to counter the attack. As Varnak swung again, Jack ducked and rolled, narrowly avoiding the deadly strike. Zinara was the next to attack. She was fast, too fast for most, and her strikes were precise, aimed at vulnerable spots in her opponent's defenses. But Jack was already anticipating her movements. As she lunged at him, her blade aiming for his side, he pivoted to the side, catching her wrist with a firm grip. He used her momentum against her, twisting her arm and sending her stumbling forward. Before she could regain her balance, Jack used his free hand to push her away, sending her crashing into Igor. Igor, enraged by the sudden attack, let out a roar and charged at Jack with brute force. He was larger than the others, his heavy steps shaking the ground beneath him. Jack could feel the weight of the force in the air as Igor swung a massive hammer at him. The blow would have flattened anyone in its path, but Jack had already calculated the distance and angle. He ducked low and slid to the side, narrowly avoiding the hammer's deadly path. Jack's movements were becoming more fluid with each passing moment. His focus was absolute, his mind working in overdrive as he anticipated each attack, each strike, and each opening. The four Zarthans were powerful, but they were also predictable. Jack was not fighting them with strength. He was fighting them with precision, using their own power against them. Kor, the strategist of the group, watched from the back, observing the fight with a calculating eye. He was waiting for an opening, waiting for Jack to make a mistake. He knew that Jack could not keep up the pace forever, that eventually fatigue would set in. But Jack wasn't showing any signs of slowing down. He was tireless, his body moving with a grace that belied the chaos around him. As Jack continued to dodge and parry, he began to notice something. The Zarthans were working as a team, but they were not in perfect synchronization. There were gaps in their formation, small openings that he could exploit. Kor, though a brilliant strategist, had underestimated Jack's ability to read the battlefield. The human was not just reacting. He was adapting, learning their patterns and finding ways to outmaneuver them. Jack saw an opportunity as Igor swung his hammer wide, leaving himself open for just a moment. In a split second, Jack dove forward, dodging the hammer and landing a powerful strike to Igor's exposed side. The Zarthan warrior grunted in pain, stumbling backward. Jack immediately followed up with a series of quick jabs to his chest, forcing Igor to drop to his knees. The crowd gasped in shock. Igor, the brute of the group, had been taken down. Jack wasn't just surviving, he was winning. Varnak, Zenara, and Kor now knew they were facing a different kind of opponent. Jack wasn't just any fighter. He was a human who had mastered the art of survival, a warrior who fought not with strength, but with strategy and intelligence. They had underestimated him, and now they were paying the price. Varnak growled in frustration, charging at Jack once again. This time, Jack didn't dodge. Instead, he used his smaller frame to duck beneath the mace's arc, and with a swift kick, swept Varnak's legs out from under him. The Zarthan warrior crashed to the ground, momentarily stunned. Kor, realizing that their strategy was falling apart, called for a change in tactics. He motioned for Zenara to attack from the rear, hoping to catch Jack off guard. But Jack was already 2 steps ahead. As Zenara darted toward him, Jack pivoted on his heel, using her speed against her. He grabbed her arm mid-swing, twisting her around and throwing her toward Kor, who had no time to react. With the entire team momentarily disoriented, Jack saw his chance. He dashed forward, moving faster than anyone had anticipated, and with a precise strike, he incapacitated Kor, knocking him to the ground. In the span of a few heartbeats, 3 of the 4 Zarthans were down. Only Varnak remained, slowly rising to his feet, his eyes filled with both rage and awe. Varnak was the last standing, but he was no longer the same warrior who had started the fight. His movements were slower now, his breath coming in heavy gasps. Jack could see the doubt in his eyes. This fight had already been lost, but Varnak was not the type to surrender. He charged at Jack one final time, hoping to land a decisive blow. Jack waited for the perfect moment, his eyes locked on Varnak's every move. When the Zarthan warrior swung his mace, Jack dove beneath the attack and swept Varnak's legs out from under him once more. This time, Jack was ready. He landed a solid blow to Varnak's chest, knocking the wind out of him. The giant warrior collapsed to the ground, unable to continue. The arena fell silent. For a moment, no one moved. The crowd, who had watched in disbelief as Jack fought against the odds, were now in stunned silence. Jack had done it. He had defeated the 4 Zarthans with nothing but his skill, strategy, and relentless determination. He was the last man standing. Lyra stood from her throne, her heart pounding. She couldn't believe what she had just witnessed. The human had defeated the Zarthan warriors. She had seen warriors fall before, but never like this. Jack wasn't just another fighter. He was a master of his craft, a warrior in every sense of the word. As Jack walked out of the arena, his face calm and unreadable, Lyra couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration and respect for him. The human had proven something she had never expected. Humans were not to be underestimated. And in that moment, Lyra realized that the myths about humanity were not just stories. They were a testament to something much greater. Jack had shown her that true strength was not in the muscles or weapons that one wielded, but in the heart and mind of the warrior. The final moments of the competition had arrived. The arena was filled with a strange, almost reverent silence as the defeated warriors were escorted out, and the crowd's attention turned entirely to the last man standing, Jack. The human who had come to this distant galaxy as nothing more than an outsider, someone with no real purpose, no desire for fame or power. And yet, here he was, having bested the greatest fighters in the galaxy. Lyra, standing at her elevated throne, felt a mixture of emotions stir within her. The pride of her people, the Zarthans, had been shattered not by an army of invaders or by a devastating weapon, but by a single human warrior. Jack had not only proven his strength, but his resolve, his ability to adapt, and most of all, his intelligence. It was not the raw power of his enemies that had mattered. It was the sharpness of his mind and the calmness of his heart that had won him this competition. Lyra couldn't help but admire him. At first, she had thought his victory was just luck, an accident in the chaos of battle. But now, as she watched him stand in the center of the arena, surrounded by the remains of her best warriors, she realized that Jack's success was no accident. He had fought every battle with a quiet confidence, never overconfident, never reckless, and always thinking several steps ahead. She had mocked the idea of human warriors for so long. But Jack had shown her the truth. Humans were warriors in their own right, and their strength did not come from brute force alone. The ceremony of victory was usually a grand affair, filled with the cheers of the crowd and the honor bestowed upon the victor. Yet for Jack, the event felt strangely anticlimactic. He had no interest in grand speeches or medals. He had come to prove something to himself, to show the galaxy that even a human could stand among the greatest warriors. He looked up at Lyra, who was still standing in her high chair, her eyes fixed on him. There was a look in her gaze, respect, or maybe even a little something else. But Jack knew she wasn't like the others. She wasn't here to shower him with praise. She had seen his abilities, and it had changed her view of humanity in ways that even she had not anticipated. "Jack!" Lyra's voice rang out, loud and clear. The crowd fell silent as all eyes turned to her. "You have done the impossible." Jack stepped forward, his face expressionless as always. His tired body moved with the same grace and ease that had carried him through every challenge. Lyra's voice softened, her eyes searching his face. "You have defeated warriors far stronger than yourself. You have shown the galaxy that strength is not only in power, but in the heart and mind. For that, you have earned something no other human has ever had, the respect of the Zarthan Empire." The crowd erupted in applause, but Jack remained still. He had never fought for respect or admiration. He had fought to survive, to prove that he could do what others said was impossible. He had fought to show that no matter where he came from, no matter his size or background, he was capable of more than anyone had ever believed. Lyra continued, her voice now carrying a hint of something more personal. "For your victory, we offer you a position of honor, the highest rank within the Zarthan military. You will have resources, soldiers at your command, and a place among the stars as one of our own." The offer hung in the air, heavy and meaningful. The crowd waited to hear Jack's response, their excitement mixed with curiosity. Every other warrior would have accepted immediately, eager to take the position, to bask in the glory that came with it. But Jack, he was different. Jack stood there, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. His gaze met Lyra's, and for the first time the hardness in his expression softened. He was grateful for the recognition, of course, but the life Lyra offered him wasn't the life he sought. He had never been one for titles or command. He was a wanderer, someone who thrived in the unknown, in the silence between battles. He didn't need to be a part of any empire to prove his worth. With a slight shake of his head, Jack spoke, his voice quiet but clear. "I didn't come here for a title, I didn't come for power. I came to prove that I could stand with the best, and I've done that." The crowd was stunned into silence. A hush fell over them as Jack continued, his words simple but meaningful. "I'm not looking for a place in your empire, princess. I'm looking for my own path." Jack paused, his eyes flicking to the side, as though he were looking out beyond the arena, beyond the palace, beyond even the stars themselves. "I'm a traveler, and that's all I'll ever be." Lyra's heart sank slightly at his words. She had expected him to refuse the honor, but not in such a way. She had thought, perhaps, that Jack's time in the Zarthan Empire might have changed him, might have shown him the value of standing with others, of being a part of something larger than himself. But Jack was not like her. He was a different kind of warrior, a solitary one. And while Lyra couldn't understand it fully, she found herself respecting him even more for it. "I understand," Lyra said after a moment, her voice steady, "and I respect your decision. You have proven that strength is not bound by title or station. It is something deeper. And for that you have my admiration." With that, the crowd erupted into applause once more, though this time it was not just for the victor's strength. It was for his choice, for the integrity of his spirit. Jack had come to this competition expecting to prove something to others, but in the end, he had proved something to himself. As the applause died down, Jack turned to leave the arena, his heart light, his mind at peace. He didn't need the accolades or the titles. He had come to test his limits to see if he could survive in the galaxy of warriors, and he had succeeded. That was enough. As Jack walked away, Lyra stood still in her throne, watching him go. She had offered him everything: power, wealth, and influence. But it had meant nothing to him. He had found something far greater than any of that. He had found his own path, and in doing so, he had earned something far more valuable than anything the Zarthan Empire could give him: true freedom. Lyra turned to the crowd, her voice ringing out one last time. "Let it be known throughout the galaxy that this human warrior has earned his place among the stars. He is not just a fighter. He is an example of the strength that lies within us all." And as Jack walked off into the distance, leaving the arena behind him, his journey was far from over. He had proven himself not just as a warrior, but as something much more. A human who had defied the odds, and in doing so, had changed the way the galaxy would see his kind forever.